In the bitter winter of 1851, a teacher named Elizabeth Hartwell stumbled upon something in the basement of St. Catherine's Academy that would alter the course of her life forever. Behind what appeared to be a forgotten wall in a dusty storage room, she discovered 24 narrow beds, each one bolted to the floor, each with cold iron shackles attached to the headboards. And beside every bed, a relic, a child's doll torn at the seams, a ribbon once bright now faded with time, and a small wooden cross worn smooth by desperate fingers. Scrawled across the crumbling wall, in the trembling hand of a child long silenced, were the words, "We are still here." Elizabeth reported her discovery to local authorities, but what she found was not welcomed. It was buried. The state sealed the records so deep they vanished from history. No one spoke of it again. Not until 1987, when renovation workers behind the altar of the Academy uncovered Elizabeth's sealed testimony hidden inside a mason jar, untouched for over a century. What they uncovered wasn't merely a forgotten report. It was a revelation of evil. It unveiled the fate of 24 orphan girls, souls lost in silence, and the chilling truth that 3 women posing as nuns would kill to protect their secret. And that secret would become one of the most sinister in all of New England's hidden past. But before we unravel the full horror behind the walls of St. Catherine's, I must warn you, this story is not for the faint of heart. This channel isn't about feel-good myths or polished history. It's about what was buried to keep you obedient. If you're ready to uncover what was never meant to surface, subscribe now and hit the bell, because what's coming next will change the way you see every so-called sanctuary. Let me know in the comments what state you're watching from, because after this, you'll wonder what secrets your town has buried beneath its churches and schools. Back in 1834, Massachusetts was booming. Cities like Boston and Worcester were thriving under the weight of the Industrial Revolution, but that progress came with its own shadow. Thousands of children, orphans, roamed the streets, abandoned by death, disease, and the merciless machine of progress. Salem, a town already stained by its witch trials and moral paranoia, remained deeply religious, its towering white Congregationalist churches looming like judges over the grey skyline. And it was in this rigid, puritanical atmosphere that St. Catherine's Academy for Young Ladies was born on Gallows Hill Road, no less. A towering 3-story brick building that once belonged to a merchant family became the face of hope. Gothic revival in design, its narrow windows and steep gables gave it a commanding, almost holy presence. On the surface, it promised refuge, education, and Christian reformation for orphan girls aged 12 to 17. Its advertisements were finely printed, boasting instruction in domestic arts, religious training, and guaranteed placement in respectable homes. To grieving families and overwhelmed parishes, it was a miracle. The face of this miracle was Mother Superior Victoria Whitman, imposing, eloquent and cold as marble. She claimed noble lineage, an education from Mount Holyoke, and missionary service in Ireland. She walked through Salem like a saint, cloaked in black, eyes sharp as razors beneath her veil. Sister Margaret Collins, soft-spoken and maternal, was her contrast, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle Irish accent who disarmed even the most traumatized child. She taught music and literature and became a surrogate mother to dozens of girls. Then there was Sister Agnes Murphy, the enforcer, disciplined, icy, and silent. She ran the Academy's finances and daily operations. She didn't just uphold rules, she was the law. The community praised them. Protestants and Catholics alike welcomed the Academy's efforts. The mayor of Salem stood beside Mother Superior at the Academy's opening in September 1834, publicly blessing what would later be exposed as something far more twisted than anyone dared to imagine. Girls came from across New England, orphans of cholera, fire, factory accidents. Each one entered the Academy under the promise of faith, education, and eventual adoption. They were given a hot meal, a modest bed, and a strict schedule. And to outsiders, everything appeared perfect. Visitors saw clean halls, neat uniforms, quiet classrooms. But they never saw the 3rd floor, always locked. They never saw the basement workshops that were mysteriously empty when inspections happened. No one noticed that girls arrived, but never seemed to age out, never wrote letters to their adoptive families, never returned. No one asked why in 17 years, not a single girl was seen again. Until one day in Boston's North End, a woman named Emma Prescott, a seamstress who once worked in a mill with one of the girls, Mary O'Brien heard something that chilled her soul, a lullaby, a voice, a memory. She followed the sound to a brothel window and saw a girl who should have been living happily with a Christian family. What she saw in that girl's eyes, emptiness, compliance, a cry for help, shattered the illusion that had protected St. Catherine's for so long. Emma tried to write. She received polite replies, warnings cloaked in scripture and veiled threats. And when she saw another girl, Sarah Thompson, led into a carriage by a rich man in Boston, dressed like a doll for sale, her fears became certainty. The letters from Mother Superior grew darker. And then someone else began to look closely, a man named Ashworth, and what he uncovered would unravel not just the academy, but the very pillars of Massachusetts society. Detective Inspector William Ashworth was no stranger to human depravity. But what he uncovered beneath the holy facade of St. Catherine's Academy would haunt even his heart and soul. The case had begun not with the academy, but with a corpse. In the summer of 1847, the body of a young woman had washed ashore in Boston Harbor. She had no name, no identification, just a crude tattoo on her wrist, a small cross with the letters SC below it. The coroner noted the girl's refined mannerisms, her delicate features, her calloused hands that suggested domestic labor. She wasn't a street girl. She had been trained, groomed, prepared. Ashworth had seen similar marks on other corpses before. Girls who had died young, always under suspicious circumstances, always with ties to Boston's elite underground. They were not simply victims of random violence. They were part of a system that sold innocence to the highest bidder. Ashworth followed the trail through brothels cloaked as boarding houses, private gentlemen's clubs, and secret societies that operated in shadows cast by churches. And time again, one institution appeared in the background like a ghost. St. Catherine's Academy, but there were no direct ties, no witnesses, no survivors, so Ashworth went undercover. He took the name Cornelius Blackwood, a wealthy merchant, allegedly seeking a younger companion for his ill wife. He approached St. Catherine's with an offer, a donation 5 times higher than the standard for adoption. It was bait, and Mother Superior took it. She welcomed him personally. She didn't just offer him a girl, she offered him options. Catherine Murphy, 15, Elizabeth Porter, 14, Hannah Clark, 16, all lovely, all obedient, all trained, not for a family, but for something else. Ashworth played along, let her speak. She boasted of discretion. She emphasized purity. She promised compliance. And then she led him, not to the main dormitory where visitors were allowed, but to a wing he hadn't seen before. The rooms were richly decorated, lined with velvet drapes and perfumed air. The girls were dressed like porcelain dolls, their eyes empty, their smiles rehearsed. And yet it was the room Ashworth glimpsed on his way out that shattered his composure completely. A workshop, hidden behind thick doors. Inside, dozens of girls, thin, exhausted, their hands bleeding from hours of forced labor. They were not the girls selected for placement. They were the forgotten ones, too plain, too broken, or no longer valuable. Ashworth knew this was far more than trafficking. This was industrialized exploitation, run by women cloaked in religion, protected by politicians, financed by judges, and blessed by clergy. But one thing had changed. Emma Prescott had come forward, her testimony aligned with Ashworth's observations. But that wouldn't be enough. He needed hard evidence, and he got it from the unlikeliest source imaginable. Dr. Nathaniel Webb, the Academy's private physician, a man paid to keep his mouth shut. For over a decade, Dr. Webb had treated accidents at the Academy. Girls with broken ribs, girls with venereal disease, eyes. Girls hemorrhaging from what were described as miscarriages or falls. But Webb kept records, names, injuries, dates, even payments. And those records led to a name list that could scorch the foundation of New England's moral elite. Judges, priests, politicians, bankers, even the mayor of Boston. Ashworth realized that the Academy was only one part of a much larger machine, a machine designed to turn abandoned girls into commodities for the powerful, a machine that punished curiosity and erased dissent. As Detective Ashworth continued investigating the records recovered from Dr. Webb's office, he found himself staring into a darker abyss than he had imagined. The names listed were not just powerful, they were untouchable. Wealthy industrialists, judges, even members of the clergy and the legislature. These were the very pillars of Massachusetts society, men who sat on committees for child welfare, who donated publicly to orphanages, and who gave speeches about morality and virtue. Yet here they were, listed in the notes of a quiet doctor who attended to their victims in secrecy. And worse, the medical records didn't end with abuse. They hinted at something far more sinister. Girls who had been treated for severe injuries would simply vanish. No discharge records. No follow-ups, no correspondence. Their names stopped appearing anywhere. When Ashworth dug into cemetery records, death certificates, and even unmarked graves in and around Salem, he found nothing. It was as if these girls had simply ceased to exist. It became clear to him some of the girls had been silenced permanently. Then came the breakthrough he didn't expect. A letter, handwritten, dated 1846, hidden in the false bottom of an old writing desk, recovered from the academy during a state-authorized search. It was from one of the girls, Hannah Clark, to her cousin in New Haven. In it, she described the horror she and others were enduring. She begged for help. "They say we will be placed soon," she wrote, "but the ones who are placed never return. The sisters say they are happy, but I know they're not. Will you? I hear them at night. I see the bruises. I am afraid I will be next." This letter was authenticated by handwriting experts and matched to Hannah's known school documents. It gave the case the emotional core Ashworth needed. Now, it wasn't just a matter of medical records and covert interviews. Now there was a voice, a girl crying out from the past, with the backing of the Attorney General and pressure from Boston newspapers, which had begun picking up whispers of a cover-up. The full weight of the state came crashing down on St. Catherine's Academy. Ashworth led a raid alongside state marshals and the militia. The academy, once a pristine symbol of religious virtue, was torn apart room by room. Hidden doors were opened, secret rooms found, shackles still attached to the beds, bloodstains on stone floors, journals, ledgers, and more letters hidden by girls who had tried and failed to get word out. Mother Superior Victoria Whitman, Sister Agnes Murphy, and Sister Margaret Collins were arrested and charged with conspiracy, human trafficking, child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of murder. But the trial, held in 1850, would never reach a proper verdict, because days before she was due to testify, Mother Superior Whitman was found dead in her cell. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but the bruising on her body and the missing pages from the prison's visitor logs said otherwise. Sister Agnes and Sister Margaret were declared unfit to stand trial after both suffered apparent nervous breakdowns. They were committed to Danvers Asylum, where they died within the decade, silent, cold, and forgotten. The academy itself was burned to the ground in 1852 by locals. Some say it was an act of justice. Others believe it was to destroy any remaining evidence, the records, sealed for more than 100 years. But now you've heard the story they tried to bury. The story of 24 girls who were never meant to speak again. Of one man and one brave woman, Ashworth and Emma, who dared to listen. So now the question is yours. What other stories have been buried under the floorboards of history? And how many more will remain silent until anyone decides to look? But not everyone believed the story had truly ended. In the decades that followed, investigators, authors, and even clergymen returned to the site, unable to let go of the unanswered questions. Private journals surfaced, written by women who had once attended St. Catherine's and escaped, but were too terrified to speak publicly. One, written by a girl known only as E, described being kept in a hidden infirmary for months, her memory fragmented by drugs and abuse, her days reduced to blurred prayers, medical procedures, and the smell of candle wax and blood. The journal abruptly ended with a single final line, "I hear the bell. I'm not supposed to write anymore." Others pointed to property ledgers and old adoption records that suggested hundreds more girls had entered the academy than could be accounted for. A researcher in 1923 claimed he found a sealed chest beneath the grounds of what had become a public park. Inside were dozens of hand-sewn name tags, each bearing a girl's name and a lock of hair tied with ribbon. All had been catalogued and forgotten, lost to time until the chest mysteriously disappeared from city archives. Conspiracy theorists insisted that St. Catherine's wasn't just a rogue institution, it was a node in a much larger network, one that stretched into elite society, the clergy, and even US government officers. They pointed to the speed with which certain records were destroyed, how key testimonies vanished during appeals, and how a federal judge attempted to shut down all future excavation of the property, citing a moral panic. Even the Catholic Church, already under scrutiny for unrelated scandals, refused to acknowledge the academy had ever been formally sanctioned. And yet, financial records tied to the Vatican showed curious donations in the 1830s and 1840s to a Massachusetts orphanage with no official name. In the years since, the site where St. Catherine's once stood has remained undeveloped. Every attempt to build has failed, contracts voided, machines malfunctioning, foundations collapsing without explanation. In 1976, a historian from Salem State College led a student team to document what remained underground. They returned with photographs of what appeared to be ceremonial rooms lined with small child-sized chairs, their wood blackened with soot. The historian never published her findings. She vanished 6 months later during a research trip to Providence. Locals say the ground still remembers. They say on certain nights, especially near the anniversary of the trial, you can hear the clinking of iron shackles and the soft murmur of a girl's prayer echoing in the dark. Others have claimed to see 3 black-veiled women standing at the edge of the trees, watching silently, unmoving and gone by morning. The legend of St. Catherine's hasn't faded. If anything, it has grown stronger. Because deep down, we all sense the truth. Some places were never meant to be sanctuaries. Some institutions were never built for salvation. And some evils wear the mask of holiness so well we don't realize the cost until it's far too late. And if you ever find yourself near Gallows Hill Road, remember this: the dead don't always rest just because the building is gone. Sometimes they're waiting, watching, remembering, and maybe, just maybe, they're still here. In 1993, nearly a century after St. Catherine's was demolished, a team of amateur paranormal investigators trespassed onto the grounds late one October night. Armed with infrared cameras and sound equipment, they hoped to film evidence of the hauntings that had become local legend. What they captured, however, was far more disturbing. The footage, now known as the Gallows Hill tape, was never publicly released. But fragments were leaked, grainy, glitching video of what appeared to be rows of small figures standing motionless in the trees, their eyes reflecting light like animals caught in headlights. The team reported hearing whispers in Latin, the toll of a bell with no source, and the unmistakable sound of weeping behind them, though no one was there. One of the investigators, a woman named Rachel Locke, was found the next morning sitting alone in the center of the old chapel foundation. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nails torn, and her clothing shredded as if she'd been crawling for miles. She could not, or would not, speak. She was institutionalized later that year and remains under care to this day. On rare occasions, nurses claim she still mutters the same phrase in a child's voice. They said the bell means you can't go home. Since then, multiple construction projects in the area have been quietly cancelled without explanation. One property investor claimed he received a letter, unsigned, written on yellowed parchment, warning him that other land is claimed. When asked by reporters why he withdrew from a multi-million-dollar redevelopment plan, he simply said, "I don't build on graves." In 2007, a freelance journalist named Carson Wells began investigating the story for a book. He was methodical, skeptical, determined to disprove the folklore. But by the following year, Wells had disappeared. His last known communication was a voicemail left for his editor, 314 AM. In it, Wells whispered, "They were never orphans. They were taken. The sisters weren't the ones in charge. Someone else was. It goes deeper. Much deeper." His apartment was later found ransacked, his notes missing. The manuscript, if it ever existed, was never recovered. The silence surrounding St. Catherine's is no longer just a product of fear. It's protected. By whom and for what purpose remains uncertain. But patterns have emerged. Those who dig too deep either vanish, go mad, or are silenced. Even in death, the Academy holds power. Because power is what it was built on, power disguised as virtue. And secrets so old, even the Church no longer dares speak their names. The true horror of St. Catherine's was never just in what was done, but in how easily it was erased. Not by fire, not by time, but by indifference. In 2014, a retired archivist named Elena Vasquez uncovered a cache of forgotten diocesan correspondences tucked inside a mislabeled file box in the basement of a defunct Boston rectory. Most were routine, land transactions, staffing updates, construction permits. But among them was a series of sealed letters marked only with a crimson wax insignia, a crown above an open eye. The language in the letters was coded but chilling. One referred to the culling of unsuitable fruit. Another mentioned compliance thresholds and the necessity of memory extraction through sacrament. No direct mention of St. Catherine's, yet all were dated between 1841 and 1856, and each was addressed to a figure only referred to as Domini Umbra, a master of shadows. Only Vasquez, experienced in deciphering church ciphers, attempted to publish her findings. 2 weeks before her press release, her home was broken into. Her research was taken. Only her original letter of resignation remained, torn and taped to her refrigerator with a kitchen knife. She fled the country shortly after, granting a single interview from a hotel in Lisbon. This wasn't just abuse, she said. This was a machine, a spiritual machine designed to erase identity, to refine obedience, to condition silence, and those girls were its gears. She has not been seen or heard from since. Theories continued to evolve, some bordering on the absurd, but others painfully credible. A declassified CIA memo from 1958 hinted at psychological experiments run through non-civilian orphanage systems during the Cold War, citing faith-based containment centers as ideal locations for intergenerational conditioning trials. One line, redacted but partially legible, referenced a program out of Salem with direct ties to the Vatican's Archivum Secretum. In 2021, a tech CEO purchased the land near Gallows Hill for a private compound. His company, a defense contractor specializing in biometric surveillance, broke ground in early spring. Within weeks, workers began reporting seizures of equipment, spontaneous power outages, and inexplicable nosebleeds. After 3 hospitalizations and a fire that destroyed over $2 million in equipment, the project was halted indefinitely. The CEO never gave an official statement, but an anonymous employee leaked an internal company memo. Its final line simply read, "Terminate all operations." The site is not compatible with containment, and so the land waits again, quiet, undisturbed, but not empty. Because what happened at St. Catherine's was never just a tragedy. It was a design, a blueprint for something far older, far colder, and far more organized than the world was ready to face. In 2022, a researcher from the University of Louvain named Dr. Liesel Verhadian published a private white paper titled Echoes in the Liturgy, Psycho-Liturgical Mechanisms in 19th Century Orphan Institutions. It was never meant for public release, but it leaked through an academic darknet forum frequented by whistleblowers and banned historians. In the final section, Dr. Verhadian described a phenomenon she called irreverent conditioning, a calculated blend of religious ritual, isolation, trauma, and sensory deprivation, designed not just to control behavior, but to rewire identity at the soul level. St. Catherine's, she argued, was one of 7 known sites across the globe where this process had been refined to its most extreme form. Verhadian's theory was chilling, that the goal was not just obedience, but vacancy. That is, to hollow out the girl until nothing remained but a shell, docile, receptive, and spiritually cleansed of will. In a footnote, she cited a Vatican psychologist who referred to these girls as angeli mechanici, mechanical angels, not daughters of God, but instruments. Living hosts for something unnamed. More disturbing were the scans embedded in her paper, ritual diagrams recovered from Jesuit field logs, showing altars marked not with crosses but sigils, ciphers linked to pre-Christian demonology fused with Christian iconography. Beneath one such sketch was a Latin phrase scrawled in haste, a fiat vacuum, fiat voluntas tua, let there be emptiness, let thy will be done. Within days of the paper's leak, Dr. Verhadian disappeared. Her lab was dismantled. The university denied her employment history. She exists now only in memory and in fragments of cached PDF files buried in the corners of encrypted academic databases, and yet more fragments keep surfacing. In March 2023, a digital archaeologist analyzing metadata in old scanned church directories found a pattern of blank entries, dates and names removed from rosters, always in groups of 12. When cross-referenced with missing persons records from the same regions and decades, a disturbing trend emerged. 12 girls, every 6 years, all between ages 9 and 13. He dubbed the pattern the choir protocol, 12 voices, 12 lambs, a sacrifice woven into the liturgical calendar like clockwork. He tried to publish. The servers hosting his research were wiped, his Reddit account deleted. Then his house caught fire in what authorities called a faulty lithium battery incident. His name was Daniel Kaya. His obituary made no mention of his work, but screenshots of his final post still circulate. They weren't random orphans. They were chosen, and not all of them died. Some of them were changed. And this is what has terrified every researcher since, the idea that some of the girls survived. But not as themselves.